Hi everyone, this is Rob Watson, the module leader for TECH2503, and this is a short introduction overview of the topics that we'll cover in the 10th lecture series for community media production. What we want to talk about today is the idea, we've discussed this to some extent already, about the idea of social solidarity. And one of the things I want to do is look at how issues of migration and immigration have been characterised in mainstream media, and how it's kind of structured our debate about who we are and who we think we are as a society, and some of the prejudices and some of the anxieties that are expressed about migration. How do they play out, and how do we reconcile a model of integrated social activity rather than segregated social activity, which seems to be the way that we are set up at the moment, and we're not achieving a sense of integration and a sense of co-development, but we've got a model of separate development, if you like. So we'll go through some arguments and discussions about what's said about migration and how it impacts on communities and kind of some of the positive and negative aspects of that. But we'll also look at this in terms of the, if you like, the overarching policy process of how the whole process of migration is managed. So on the one hand, there's quite a lot of, there used to be, it seems to have died down now, quite a lot of stories in the press, and particularly some of the more right-wing newspapers, the Mail and the Express and the Telegraph, about the spectre, the haunt, or the anxiety of mass migration. And they seem to have kind of dropped off the radar now, whereas when you actually start to analyse the numbers, you realise that in relative terms to other European nations, the UK has been affected in a very limited way by mass migration, and it hasn't been affected in the same way that other nations have shouldered their responsibilities to support people in times of crisis. And a lot of the migration that has kind of occurred over the last 10 years has been driven by social conflict and unemployment, rather than by a positive, a free choice, if you like. People are trying to escape a negative environment, and they're being barricaded from entry into Western European nations. So there's a politics to this, a big P politics to this, and this is kind of something which has kind of been played out through the press coverage and the kind of reporting that's taken place, and the lead that by some of these right-wing newspapers that has been followed by organisations like the BBC causes some kind of concern. But this is tied in with government policy, because it's really ironic that for successive governments to fail to invest in integration and dispersal, rather than what it's invested in is concentration and groups, almost segregation, to report back on this in the Casey report, which was released in 2016, really kind of flagged up some issues about the state of some of our communities being homogenous in terms of immigrant communities having embedded and entrenched isolation and not being integrated within wider social patterns of community engagement through the rest of the United Kingdom. So you get hotspots like Burnley and Bradford and Leicester and Luton, where communities are kind of lumped together, ethnic communities particularly, and then you've got other areas which are kind of counties which are not affected by immigration but have high rates of anxiety about immigration. So the perception of immigration is one of the key driving factors of the political debate. But the policy decisions which have driven this need to be questioned and need to be identified and need to be given a kind of, the question is, what can community media do to help support, mitigate, influence and change these policy discussions? So we'll look at this in some detail, and then we'll ask questions about, I suppose the question is, what's the driving factors of this, and kind of how does we've talked about the great disruption, and we've talked about how the problems need to be solved with this in the future. Is it enough to just pull down the barricades and not allow anybody else into the country when it's essential that we play a part in a modern, interconnected, globalized, economy. And can we kind of wind back the clock, if you like, to the 1950s, when British identity was homogenous, was kind of self-identified within a very small range of people, rather than the broad range of people that it is now. So underpinning some of this is there's a sense of kind of moral panic that is attached to immigration, and kind of scare stories, and there's kind of notions that kind of the kind of very kind of pernicious kind of language of being swamped. And the Brexit debate was the famous poster with Nigel Farage, we're going to have thousands of people flooding the country, and it just turns out not to be true. So there's a lot of kind of debates, there's a lot of lessons to be learned from this, and I think one of the things we need to think about is what the tools are that we have as community media advocates and community developers with media. What are the tools that we have that can help to move things forward in an inclusive and a non-confrontational way, so that people can establish patterns of behaviour and patterns of association which are not segregated but which are integrated, and which have common ideals and refer and relate to people's, it becomes a more sustainable approach rather than a divisive approach, which our politics seems to construct this kind of discourse as at present. Anyway, the notes are available on the DMU Commons Wiki. That's at wiki.our.dmu.ac.uk. I say this thousands of times every week. I can't remember why I went blank then. Just look for the TECH2502, TECH2503 section. You won't find one called TECH2502. And I'll see you at the lecture next week.